Welcome, guys. Appreciate you. Welcome. Appreciate you joining. Today, we are going to talk about property inspections and my showing process leading up to the inspection, as well as some of the attorney review stuff and how we deal with negotiating inspection credits, etc. Well, first of all, congratulations. You have a property under contract. That's super exciting and is obviously leading to the end goal, which is your client getting into a home. As a real estate broker, that's how we get paid. So the whole process comes together at the end, but there are several hurdles, the property inspection being one of the biggest ones. When I'm touring homes, I like to educate my clients on the condition and some of the visuals that I see while I'm touring homes. This is something that's going to come with experience. It's also going to come with the more inspections you sit in and the more property inspections you are a part of. So that's kind of the learning process of all of this. The first tour that I'm on with clients, I'm pretty high level. You're typically bundling 3 or 4 properties together. You don't want to spend enormous amounts of time in every property, going through the details of the exterior, interior, etc. But on second showings, I always schedule a much longer timeline. I always schedule more time to be involved in the exterior of the property, the interior, the basement, the mechanicals. Talk about that. I'm going to talk about that in detail as we go through. Welcome, everybody. Sorry, got some late joinings. We're going to be talking about property inspections and how I handle that. And we're right on the front end here. So when I'm walking through a property and a buyer is interested, what I'll almost always do is email the listing broker and ask them for a tear sheet or a one sheet. It's going to basically have all the age of the property, appliances, mechanicals, roof, some major components of the home and or condo, HOA. All of this is relevant, and they'll be able to send that to you. We always ask our sellers for this. You guys should get in the practice of asking this of all of your sellers. If you need the details on what we ask for, let me know. I can send you that. It's super important to get that as a buyer's agent, so you know going into this what your negotiation strategy is going to be. And this will come into play later in the negotiations and potentially even during attorney review. You're obviously not going to ask for a new roof if in that tear sheet it says, hey, the roof's 25 years old and it needs replacing. You already knew that. Make sure you're educated. Make sure your client understands what they're getting themselves into. Always ask for the HOA reserve balance, any past and upcoming special assessments. Please do not ask these questions at the showing. It is not relevant. You are not going to remember. Email the agent, be professional, respect their time, respect that they obviously do not have every listing's HOA balance in their back pocket. That is one of my biggest pet peeves. So it's exciting. You guys have this property under contract and you're scheduling the inspection. You should coordinate with your clients. I always suggest that the buyer is at the home inspection. It's a fantastic time for you to spend 2-3 hours in the property you're potentially going to live in for 8 to 10 years. And you probably haven't done that yet. You've only been there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. This is a great opportunity to spend hours in the property, really visualizing, strategizing, and most importantly, learning about your home. The home inspection is going to be a very detailed, it just pulls the hood up and looks underneath and finds out what's going on. And you want to know all of the ins and outs. You may not even know how a HVAC system works. Your inspector will teach you that, right down to changing the filter. I mean, that's obviously super basic, but some people who've never lived in a home don't have that knowledge base. Always be at the inspection. And honestly, the first 20 inspections that you go on, maybe more, you should seriously be tailing that inspector right behind him and let him know beforehand, hey, I would love to shadow you during this inspection. I'd love for you to be verbal. I want to learn everything that you're doing and all of the processes that you're going through to uncover these items as a broker. And when I'm touring the homes, I can then point them out. I'm going to talk about this again a little later in the call of what that means and what that looks like. I always like to recommend a few inspectors. There's so many great ones out there, and I don't ever push my client to using one of my recommended inspectors, but it really is all about the delivery. You want to get a full cavity search of this home, and you are an advocate for your buyer. You obviously don't want them to buy a lemon, but every home is going to have issues, right? Every home is going to have a laundry list of inspection items that you're going to need to go through and combat with your buyer to get to an end game, which is buying this home ultimately. And again, every house is going to have some issues. You have to get an inspector that does a fantastic job, not only during the inspection, but delivering the message. That is so important. And that's something I found a lot of inspectors do not do well. Shout out to Paul Nashland, one of my first inspectors. This guy was a tradesman, moved into the inspection world, incredibly knowledgeable, had a fantastic delivery, spent time with the client, educating them on the home, letting them know that, yeah, this isn't the perfect building application, but here's how you could remedy it. Your house is not falling down. I mean, first and foremost, most of these homes have been around 50, some of them 100 plus years. What you see is what you get. The structure is there. Modifications can be made. And if there's major stuff, we'll address it. Once, when we're going into the inspection, I always prep the buyer and let them know what to expect. Let them know that this guy's going to be here for 3 hours and that they're going to find these laundry list of items. I also let them know what the back end looks like. Hey, you're going to get a 20+ page report. If they just get blindsided with this report, they're going to be overwhelmed. I let them know that I'm going to be there along the way. I also get this report, and what I do as part of my process with buyers is I will go through the report and peel out the summary of what I feel is important and what the seller should address. Obviously, every case is different, right? If this is a hyper competitive situation and you bought it as is, and this is just academic to do the inspection, you better know what you're getting yourself into. But if this is a traditional deal where you were negotiating a property and maybe he came off a little bit on price and you feel like maybe you paid a hair too much, the negotiations during inspection definitely happen for items that we did not know about. That is the key. So when you're looking at this report and it's 20 some pages long and you go through the details and summarizing them for your client, always look for items that are health, safety, major mechanical, structural, items that you feel, again, were not visual. If there's a big black scratch on the wall or there's some reverse polarity electrical outlets, those are not big items. You have to skip over those and focus on the major items. When we get that list and I've summarized it for the client, once the buyer and I have agreed on that summary list, and usually it's 8 to 10 action items at the most. Sometimes it's as little as 2 or 3. Fadi and I were just discussing a property right now that was, had some action items on an inspection. It was a traditional negotiation. He's going to go back and say, hey, these were big ticket items that we didn't necessarily know were in need of repair. So he's going to work towards a credit. When I do submit these items, I have that laundry list. I give it to our attorney. The attorney incorporates that into the buyer attorney letter, which has some other modifications that the legal team handles. I don't ask for a credit off the bat. I always submit the action items in the attorney letter, and I let the sellers respond. Sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised where the seller will be like, wow, we didn't know that this was deficient. We will absolutely take care of A, B, and C, and we will offer you an X dollar credit for the remaining items. I don't like to negotiate against myself when submitting action items for an inspection report. So go ahead and just submit and see how that goes. I'm always available to help put a dollar value or work towards an impasse, or work past an impasse, work past an impasse when we're dealing with negotiations during inspection items. I've always found that letting the attorney handle the majority of those negotiations is really good. If you do get to an impasse, I always jump on a call, talk to the listing broker, let them know what's really important to my buyer, let them know what's going to have to be overcome from the seller side, and make sure we get to a mutually agreeable number, whether that's a credit or repair. Repairs are difficult. When sellers often suggest a repair, some buyers are never going to be happy with the quality of that repair. So it does often turn into a dollar value. It takes time and skill to value these items. And again, I'm always happy to discuss if you guys want to know what you think it would cost to replace X. Those are things I can help with early on. But as you work through the number of negotiations and get up to 10, 20, 30 deals, these are going to come pretty easily to you guys. Showing details I like to know when I'm working with a buyer Walking up to the home, obviously you want to know what the home is made of, right? It seems obvious, but if you're walking up to a frame home, it could be traditional siding, it could be hardy board, which is fiber cement, it could be wood, cedar, it could be an engineered product. You guys have to educate yourselves on the exterior building types. This is really important, and you need to know when it's done properly. You need to know when there's flashing missing, weeps, etc. in the masonry. Masonry in the city is a big thing. We use a bunch of different types of building materials here. Split face block that was used between '08 and like 2012 or 2013. You're no longer allowed to use that material. It is not an acceptable building material in Chicago, and it does get a bad rap. I typically steer my buyers away from split face block if there are issues in the building, or even just in general. It's not my favorite building product. Does come back to haunt you. Smooth face block, if managed properly, is a great building material. There's utility brick, which is slightly larger than the face brick. Educate yourselves on building products so you're walking up and understanding what you're getting yourself into. And again, this education is going to happen when you work with your inspector and follow him around. He's going to point out all of these nuances and all these building types so you understand what's happening and what the pros and cons are to each. That's most important. Similarly, inside the house, you're walking inside and you want to understand with your buyer, you want to be able to articulate, hey, this is your heating system. Here's how this works. You have, usually on a second showing, again, you have a 90% efficiency furnace. It's direct vent outside the house versus a chimney vent. You want to be able to identify the age of cooling systems and heating systems, generally speaking. And some of that is really just a visual thing. Sometimes the really old ones look like they're really old, and there's going to be a 10 or 20-year window where you really might not have any idea. But direct vent, again, can tell a story. Plumbing type, copper versus galvanized pipes, that's a really big tell in some of these buildings on vintage and what kind of updates have been made. You want to know if a new water service has been put in, and sometimes that's visual. All of these things will help you in negotiations and help your buyer understand that you are the expert here. They're going to be relying on you during negotiations, and not only negotiations, but actually identifying the right home. A lot of times I've talked buyers out of working with a specific home because I felt it was just so dated. And while they did put a lot of updates into the kitchen and maybe bathrooms, they didn't do the guts of the home, which to me is really important. If they're not updating copper pipes when they're doing a bathroom, that's a red flag to me. Windows, doors, architectural stuff, those are all things you're going to learn when you're shadowing an inspector. And again, I can't tell you how important it is to educate yourself and shadow that inspector during this 3-hour window. You have really I don't go to inspections anymore. I've done hundreds, but all of my agents that do shadow have learned so much. It's amazing the knowledge they bring out of this. One of the things inspectors love using is past their useful life, or they'll defer to having a specialist come in and identify some of the issues they've seen in the house. That's their way of passing liability. You also need to know when that's necessary and when that's not necessary. Bringing a structural engineer into a home is always difficult. I've never seen a structural engineer put their stamp of approval on any home. It's just impossible. They would have to do a coring. They'd have to you have to know what you're getting yourself into. Okay. You guys be educated. I do suggest doing radon tests. Those are always a good idea. You can do radon maps online and see if you're in a high density area. Make sure you identify a crawl space and let your inspector know. He better put that hazmat suit on and get in there and get dirty. That is his job. Make sure they understand what this home is, and they usually do. The ones that I've worked with are always ready to climb on roofs, get into the crawl spaces, and understand every little bit of this home so the buyer feels comfortable moving forward. We're also seeing a lot of thermal imaging happening. That's really great. You can see if there's moisture behind the walls. One other thing that's really important during an inspection is the meet and greet with the listing agent. There's going to be a host agent there most of the time, and they're going to be sitting there on their computer. Sit down with them for 15, 20, 30 minutes and really get to know them. These relationship builders will come into play down the road, especially if it's a high volume broker. You want to be on their good side. You want to just build rapport in this business. It's a big, there's a lot of brokers, but you know that the majority of the deals are done by these high producing agents. Get to know them, let them know that you're there to make sure this gets to the goal line, and you can be a collaborative real estate broker. I hope you guys are really doing your prospecting. You should all be on the phone at least an hour a day. This is a huge piece of generating business. I know it's tedious and I know it's difficult, but every single coach, every single platform, every single training platform out there is going to say, get on the phone, start making calls, and get engaged in real estate. Working with a buyer is a really great education process for every single broker from start to finish. I always suggest you are there every step of the way, even when you're not being engaged during the negotiations of the credits and things like that while attorney review. Make sure you're watching and reading and understanding what's happening. So when they do come and call you and they say, hey, Matt, did you see that last email? Absolutely. You must be up to date and up to speed on everything that's happening on that deal. This covered a ton of stuff from showings to inspection items and educating yourself on the home. I'm going to open it up to questions. And at this time, fire away.
I have a quick question for you. Is the inspector that you said you liked, is he on our vendor list?
Absolutely. And I can recommend a few,
Okay.
Privately as well.
That would be great. I have one or two, but it's always good to have. Sometimes their schedules get a little busy, and I realize that I really want a good third or fourth just in case for a rotation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's another thing. Inspections do have to happen within 5 or so days of contracting on a home. So to Amani's point, there can be in a hypermarket where it's really busy, inspectors just don't have time. So definitely have at least 2 or 3. I always did in my Rolodex, which is really a contact list now, but definitely have a few in your book. April, you had a question?
Hi. So I looked at a house yesterday, and it is a as-is house. Inside the house, they had a letter from an engineer, a structural engineer, who had looked. It's an old farmhouse, so it's over 100 years old. But the letter, I did take a picture of what the letter said too. Basically, he, went through and saw that what they did do, like shoring up the foundation of the house from underneath, like the old basement. What they did do is a good temporary fix, basically, is what the letter said. That he also recommended that it be permanently changed to, however, I forgot what the words were. But do you recommend like an inspector coming in with like a second walkthrough of the house if the client's really super interested still?
No matter what the deal is, as is hyper competitive, I always have a property inspection on a home. There is zero reason not to. One, you want to literally defer the risk away from you and make sure the buyer knows exactly what they're getting themselves into. Any type of house has structural or shoring issues. It can be difficult. It can be a red flag. I wouldn't say steer clear of it, but make sure your buyer knows what they're getting themselves into. I did buy a house once with a client in the suburbs where they did some pretty heavy duty structural shoring, and it was a known issue in the area. And there was a company out there that did it and performed that task, really well. It doesn't say, I wouldn't say run, but I would say make sure you understand the cost. A lot of that shoring can cost $30,000 to $50,000 per house. So depending on the value of the home, you have to make sure that's worth it.
Right. So I should be able to find an inspector to go in with me, like during a second walkthrough of the house.
The inspector is not going to be able to identify structural issues or shoring issues. They're going to defer that to a specialist. And we could take this offline, April, if your client does feel like it's the right fit and the right home. I would first of all tell them that any structural shoring is going to be $30,000 to $50,000. But if it's temporarily supported and there's no movement for however many years, you should be okay.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks again for joining. I was letting everybody know that we are seeing a lot of activity on the YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like the videos so we can build our following. We appreciate that. So have a great day, guys. And any other questions, just fire off and private message me.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too, guys.